Hey everybody, this is Count MRVHS. Welcome to a bit of an experimental video here. We are taking a look at some of my books. This is something that I mentioned I would be interested to do after I hit 1,000 subscribers. Nobody asked for it. I just thought it might be fun. I've been, collecting books for a while and wanted to do an inventory of them for some time. But the thought of writing down all of the titles seems a little boring and also a little futile because the collection is always growing and changing. And this video format will be outdated very soon anyway, but it would be fun to do regardless. So as we get into it, remember a couple of things. One, this is not like a professionally curated collection of books. There is a great variety here, from things that are very specialized academic books, things that I know quite a lot about, and there are very popular books here that I just got them because the pictures are cool. So there are some big gaps, I guess, in terms of the quality of what we're going to see, but that's fine. The other thing is, let me know if you have any recommendations for anything. If you see that I've got a gap in the shelves, like an obvious title is missing, I would love to hear that. So any recommendations would be fantastic. I think we're going to take this kind of slow. So this is going to be a series. We're not getting through all of them today. We're not even getting through one single shelf today. We are going to go through this shelf right today. And this is kind of the beginning of my history section, I guess. Categorization is a whole other thing. It's all going to be arbitrary, and it's always going to be unsatisfying. Because I've got, history over here, I've got literature over there, then I've got theology, philosophy, right? Then I've got languages, books on translation, books on linguistics and philology, books on learning specific languages, and then mythology, which is books that are not like the primary source. So like the Iliad and the Odyssey are over with literature, but like a collection of retold myths is over there. Anyway, I've been thinking about redoing things for a while, but that is going to take some thought. So today we're just going over some things, and this will be fairly haphazard, but let me know what you think. Now, one thing that I also wanted to mention is, we're going to see a lot of books in the series that I haven't read. And I don't feel bad about that at all. I've never really been that worried by the fact that I've got more books than I probably will ever read, because a lot of the books that are here are things that almost just having them, it gives you a better understanding of the topic, if that makes sense. The fact that you looked into it, you maybe browsed through it, you read the back, you flipped through it, you get a sense that someone has dedicated their life to studying, for example, Elephants and Kings and Environmental History. I have not read this. Now I will read this, but I haven't read it yet. But even if I were to never read it, I got a little bit of something out of just knowing that it is there and being able to see it on my shelf. That's the reason I keep the physical books, because my brain doesn't remember things unless they're in front of my face very well. One of the ways, though, that I have been able to increase my reading has been doing this little mental trick. And what I've done is, I think I started this about 4 years ago, where I would simply write down the titles of any book that I had finished. And so at the end of the year, I would have, okay, I finished 33 books this year, or whatever it was. And then you can see that it becomes a game where you are always trying to increase that number. I think I peaked at around 50 books one year. This year, it's gone very, very low as I've been trying to increase my writing rather than my reading. But I found that trick of just writing down the title of a completed book to be a very effective psychological trick to keep me motivated to finish something. And I think it was good, but I also want to say that there are maybe some downsides to it. It is not always a good thing to finish a book. It is not always beneficial to put yourself through the ringer just so that you can say, I read this book cover to cover. It's a bit of a meme, but I have heard it said that many books could be articles And as someone who does a lot of writing and is very critical of the amount of bloviation that I engage in as a writer, it's easy to see other writers doing the same things. And I've got to say that I do sympathize with that argument, that a lot of books could be much shorter, but because they are intended to be packaged and marketed and sold in a certain way, there's an incentive to, put all of your stuff together and push it out as a big book. So when you are engaged with this exercise of trying to increase the number of books you're reading, you have to be aware of that. You're going to read a bunch of things that you will gradually realize don't need to be as long as they are and could have been maybe better edited. We're going to talk about some examples of that today. So the other thing is, it almost seemed a little unhealthy at a certain point to just sort of keep challenging myself to read more books. What's the purpose for it, right? So, it can be helpful if you're in a situation where you need to get through like a lot more books, or you've got a project you're working on, using those kind of gamifying tricks to get yourself motivated. I find it very effective, but I also find, there can be some downsides. So anyway, here's the history section. I'm going to grab some off of the top here. These are a bit out of frame. But these are sort of books that I don't know exactly how to categorize in other ways. And so from the bottom here, we've got The Horse, the Wheel, and Language. That's David Anthony. This is probably 15 or so years old at this point. This is a book that I am very eager to get into, but I haven't read it yet. However, this is one of those kind of categorization problems, right? All of these 4 books actually are hard to find a home for. This probably shouldn't be in the history section, but regardless, it's a wide-ranging book from what I can tell, getting into linguistics, getting into archaeology, history. What I'm concerned about with this is that it will be very archaeology heavy. That is not a field that I am very well versed in, and I find that I've bought several books by archaeologists that pitch themselves very well, but are like histories of digs more than they are of anything that I'm actually interested in, quite frankly. I'm not an archaeologist. The drama of digging in a field for 12 hours is not going to draw me. To give you an example, let's see. So this is a book that I have read, The Viking Great Army and the Making of England. And I found this a pretty enjoyable read, except for the parts where they were talking about the digs, right? Like, it was a rainy day in Suffolk, right? The local farmer was just returning from the inn when he happened to see a glint of rusted metal in his field. It's like, oh, okay, just get to the history. I bought this book, right, not so that I could hear about how in 1985 Dr. So-and-so and his grad students went into a field, right? I'm being maybe a little too harsh here towards archaeologists. I apologize if there are any listening. But the fact is, this is really marketed as, we're going to get some history, we're going to get some, some understanding of this great army and the making of England. And you do, but there's a lot of it that really isn't interesting to me personally. I guess that's it. Okay, but we'll look at that more closely on another day. The Horse, the Wheel, and Language. This is a book that I was really drawn to based on a particular paragraph that I'd like to read here. This is, not really relevant for anything, but chapter 1 is called The Promise and Politics of the Mother Tongue. And so this is, I take it, Anthony's way of setting up, how language and tradition sort of perpetuates a sense of community and identity and things like that. And so he starts off with this section on ancestors. Paragraph 2 is as follows. It is disconcerting to realize how few of our ancestors most of us can recognize or even name. You have 4 great-grandmothers, women sufficiently close to you genetically that you see elements of their faces and skin and hair each time you see your reflection. Each had a maiden name she heard spoken thousands of times, and yet you probably cannot recall any one of their maiden names. If we are lucky, we may find their birth names in genealogies or documents, although war, migration, and destroyed records have made that impossible for many Americans. Our 4 great-grandmothers had full lives, families, and bequeathed to us many of our most personal qualities, but we have lost those ancestors so completely that we cannot even name them. How many of us can imagine being so utterly forgotten in just 3 generations from now by our own descendants that they remember nothing of us, not even our names? And I love memento mori, right? Like, if there's anything that you're going to get me on, it's sort of a memento mori type of conceit. And that really attracted me. That let me know that this is a writer that at least had that kind of sensibility that I would get something out of. Now, again, this could turn out to be an incredibly dry book. He has a thesis that my understanding is it has been challenged in recent years about, the specific dates of, I guess, migration patterns and linguistic change and what we can actually tell about horse domestication and things like that. That's fine. Again, this is not a field that I am, professionally investigating. I'm getting it for just sort of a general personal interest. And so a lot of the books that we're going to see here are in that vein. They're all problematic. People are always going to be challenging them. So we have to be just be aware of that. The second book here, Civilizations. We're not going to spend that much time on all of these things. But Civilizations is by Felipe Fernandez Armesto. And this is one that I got very many years ago. It's just sort of a general catch-all of global civilizations. He defines it here, as you can tell by the subtitle, Culture, Ambition, and the Transformation of Nature. So his working definition of civilization is a polity, a group, a culture is more civilized to the extent, or, you can measure the civilization based on how far it distances itself from nature. So then he has to define nature, right? And I remember that when I first picked this up, there were some interesting questions we got into with other friends of mine about, is this really a valid criteria? How can you determine that? This is a book I've started but not finished. It's very big, it's very broad, it's got some big ideas, like I think a lot of his books. But there's also something a little off-putting about it because he doesn't take the time to really, establish a good vibe, I guess. I'm a sucker for atmosphere. That's what I'm interested in. And I should also say that that with regards to history, I'm not a historian. So what I'm looking for in these books is not just the facts. I'm looking for entertainment, quite honestly. This is like my romance novels, okay? So that's what I'm into history for. And, while I am, of course, interested in inaccuracy to an extent, I'm not here solely because of that. A very different book, very different vibe here is Mediterranean, A Cultural Landscape. And so this is a book by Predrag Matvejevic, I guess. And just to sort of flip it open randomly, just entirely randomly, we can tell this is a very, very different kind of book, right? I have not read this one, but I've definitely flipped through it, right? And I love old maps, so it's got old maps on just about every other page, old sort of illustrations. Of course, now I'm not finding any. There we go. There's another one. This is, a hard to describe book because it's not a history of the Mediterranean per se. It's relatively short. It is just as it says, a cultural landscape. So it's getting into different groups, different periods of history, but it's a book that I'm really going to like when I feel like I can sit down and just enjoy it slowly. Another one in a similar vein here is Black Sea by Neil Asherson. And again, I got this relatively recently, have not read it yet. It's again a difficult one to categorize simply because it covers a period, not a period, but a region over very many periods, like thousands of years. At one point, it's talking about like the geological history of the Black Sea, and then it gets into you know, how it was during World War II, and then we're back into the Goths in the 2nd century, and then, you know, we go to a different setting. So again, it's a very wide-ranging kind of book. This is more of a, I take it, kind of a personal story, a bit of a travel log almost, and so the back and forth can be a little disconcerting. That's the impression I'm getting. Again, I haven't read it all the way through, but at some point, I will do that. This is, I mean, a lot of these books come from being in a bookstore and feeling like you need to buy something. I'm that kind of person. If I go into a bookstore and there's like one old guy there behind the counter, I'm not leaving empty-handed, right? I've got to get something. So that's that. Okay, with this section, now we're getting more into the kind of ancient history stuff. And today we're going to pretty much end with the Hellenistic period, I guess. I don't have a ton in this area, so this is not going to be very impressive. That's fine. We're going to get into more stuff in the next video when we get into the kind of Roman history, because I've got more sources on that. This one I find interesting, the Biblical World, an Illustrated Atlas. So it is a, you know, big, well-illustrated, you know, kind of coffee table book, basically. And there's a lot of good stuff. I want to say this is from the 90s. Again, I haven't read this. This is not the kind of book that one sits down to read. Although, when I was deep in the throes of recording book titles, I would make it a habit every morning, you know, to get up and have breakfast and have coffee and sit with a book like this and then get through it throughout the course of, you know, a few weeks. Just reading it in the morning there. So that can be an enjoyable thing. You can tell by the little yellow rectangle at the bottom that this is a National Geographic book. And I would almost describe this as a Bible atlas for agnostics and atheists. It's fine. It's just you can almost make a drinking game out of how many times the writers actually something in the Bible, right? It feels like it was published in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s. It just has that feel about it, that kind of, well, of course, no one really believes this stuff, right? But here's what most likely really happened, right? So I find that just funny. Anyway, we have one that I have read here, The Ancient World at War. We're going to see a lot of military history books here. Again, I'm not like a military historian expert or anything, but they're cool. Given what the channel is about, that will make sense to you, right? Why I have so many of these books. This is, what is this? Philip de Souza is the editor here, and this is a Thames and Hudson press, I guess. So lots of big illustrations. Let me turn towards the microphone here. Just a very fun, again, kind of a coffee table book. I got the bookmark in here because I was coming back to chariots at this section. I think I got this in large part because at the time I picked it up, I was working or beginning to work on Wainwriters, and so I wanted some sources on that. Not a lot about chariots here, but the thing I will say about it is very broad, and so it takes the ancient world, you know, largely, really, it's ancient Eurasia, but at least it gets into Asia, right? And it does so with more detail than maybe you would expect, I guess. So there's even some battle maps, right? This is probably Cannae, right? Like it's the big ones. It's the ones you've already seen battle mapped out before. So there's nothing really revolutionary here, but it's a decent one. This one, Ancient Egypt, I don't even feel the need to pull this one down. This is just a big book, a coffee table book on Ancient Egypt. I don't remember where I got it or when I got it, but this and the Golden King, another very coffee table-y kind of book on Egypt. Beautiful pictures. You know, I pick these up if they're cheap, and I haven't really gotten into them. Egypt is a thing that I feel I should know something about, and so, you know, those are there. Now we're getting into some books that I don't like. So this one is Norman F. Cantor's Antiquity. I got this relatively cheaply, $3.95 at a local used bookstore here, so fantastic. I never finished this because Norman F. Cantor is, when was this? 2003, so that's about right. This was the point, I think, when popular histories started to become obnoxious, in my view. once you get into the 2000s. Before then, you could have relatively intelligent public histories or popular histories. So what's an example of that? Let's take something like this. Does this count as a popular history? The Franks by Edward James. I don't know. This is published by Blackwell. Okay, Oxford and New York. So that's probably part of it. But this felt like, okay, it's not intended for a specialist, right? It's intended for people who know a little bit about history in general. But this is sort of treating you like an adult. This treats you like a child, from what I remember. And so it bugged me. It bugged me also how obnoxiously dismissive he was of ancient beliefs, ancient cultures, politics, morality. It was just the worst kind of vaguely Western, agnostic, liberal snootiness, right? There was just nothing interesting about it. And it was like the publisher told him, you got to write a book on antiquity. And he was like, okay, fine. Maybe that's unfair. I haven't read this in about 25 years. I read another one of his books on the plague when I was in college. That didn't strike me as bad. But this one was one that I had to just stop. All right. Let's put the Franks back. Into some more interesting things. So this I have not read yet, The Babylonians. Gwendolyn Leak is just an introductory little book, but it will probably serve me well. Again, used bookstores got this for under $5, so that's great. But the one that I am much more excited about is this. So this is also a nice illustration of my reading habits. If I want to learn about, like, the Babylonians, which of these books should I read? I'm going to read this one, even though I have no business reading this one. I don't know much about ancient Babylon, so why am I reading an incredibly niche book that's translated from the French, by the way, about literacy in Babylon? Well, because again, the popular histories, I've been burned so much, tend to just beat around the bush, take so much of your time away, try to tell you an interesting story, but they inevitably fail. So that I find it more interesting to just dig in, read the dry, sort of specialist histories. If they can string sentences together, fantastic. I don't need to learn this for a test or anything, and I'll come away with some really interesting knowledge, I think. So I found this to be fantastic. This is not going to teach you to read cuneiform or anything, but you're going to see some nice pictures of them. And what I found really interesting about this was the way it presented the cuneiform scribes of the later period as almost these incidental inventors of Gnosticism in a way. That's probably not accurate, but when the alphabetic scripts began to become more popular, the cuneiform guys were still doing their thing, and they were becoming a bit of a dying breed because the alphabetic scripts were, I don't know, more efficient somehow, easier to use, maybe more easily able to be transmitted. Whatever the case, there was more specialized knowledge needed to understand this kind of writing. And so rather than just dying off, the cuneiform scribes began to sort of, I don't know if they consciously did this, but the impression seems to be, from what I remember of this book, that they actually sort of presented themselves as guardians of a sort of obscure divine knowledge. And so if you listen to us, we will tell you, we can communicate in the language of the gods, right? The ancient cuneiform tablets. So it's just basically, credentialism and niche protection turned into kind of proto-Gnosticism. I thought that was very, very fun. Okay, so that's those two. I did read Reading and Writing in Babylon, and another one I did read here, 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed by Eric Klein. This was a bit of a slog to get through, I'm not going to lie. I see this one mentioned a lot when people are talking about, where can I learn more about the Bronze Age collapse? Like, this seems to be a bit of a standard popular text. it didn't seem so condescending as a lot of popular histories are, and that's probably because he is, primarily a specialist in the field, from what I understand. But this was one of those books where I got the suspicion it could be an article or a couple of articles rather than a whole book. He goes over a lot of the theories as to why the collapse happened, potentially why it happened, but I think the writing lacked a bit for me to really get invested. And that's, again, I'm not a specialist, but I read these books not so that I can learn history to get my PhD or to write a scholarly article, but to get immersed, right? And so if you're not going to give me a picture, it's hard for me to get really behind whatever it is you're doing. So this was not very fun to read. It gave me maybe a broader understanding, but also the thesis was a bit weak in the sense that I came away with this, I think, and maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but my impression is kind of, we don't really know, and there's a lot of options as to what may have caused this Bronze Age collapse. So maybe it's unfair to Mr. Klein. He certainly seems like a very nice guy on YouTube. You can see him there doing videos. But I really wasn't into his book. But that book was worlds above this piece of glossy, beautiful garbage. This is one of the worst books I have slogged through from beginning to end. And I only did it because the illustrations are gorgeous. You've got photographs from the actual, like Assyrian palaces, like we've got here. You've got Angus MacBride paintings in this thing. I can probably find some here. What do we got here? Yeah, there's some Angus right there, Angus MacBride. If you know Osprey books, you know this guy. There's some beautiful artworks as well as the actual, there's another one. So it's a great book for that, for finding cool things. It's just too bad about the writing. Mark Healy needs an editor. This is horrible. I know it's an Osprey book, and maybe those get a pass in the sense that, okay, we're really reading them for the pictures, but come on, this was so disappointing. And it wasn't even like an organizational problem, he disordered some paragraphs or some sentences. No, it was just downright proofreading level stuff, where here's one sentence and then another sentence right after it that says exactly the same thing. Or here's an absolutely convoluted, needlessly complex series of sentences that is trying to say something very simple, actually. So horrible, horrible writing. This is the kind of book that you get to flip through. I guess I learned something about the Assyrians. It does cover a very broad period of history. And so maybe I shouldn't knock it too badly. I teach writing, so this is, kind of my thing. And it's possible to get good information out of this book. The reason I picked it up was because look at those beautiful chariots. Look at that. That's from a time when chariots were a manly weapon, not the effete, flighty, skirmishing chariots of the Egyptian period. But no, a big screw you, 4-horse, 4-man, wheels bigger than a dude. We're going to bear down on you and you're going to run, we hope, because we probably don't want to crash into you. I just like the idea of the Assyrian chariot. The late Assyrian chariot seems really cool. This was another one I probably picked up as part of research for Wainwriters, where, in Appendix A in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is describing the wars of the Wainwriters, and in one of these battles in 1944, he talks about how the chariots and cavalry of the Wainwriters smashed into the disordered ranks of Gondor. And, the more you read about chariots historically through all these specialists, the more you get a consensus that chariots were not in fact used to smash through enemy lines. And that's very disappointing. And I think that they're wrong because it's a boring point of view. So they're probably not wrong only because of that, but I prefer how Assyrians depicted their chariots rolling over the corpses of the slain. That is how you want to use a chariot, not to just skip away and shoot arrows at people. Come on. All right, that's the ancient Assyrians. Now we're getting on to Persian stuff a little bit, Greco-Persian history. So here we've got Shadows in the Desert, Ancient Persia at War by Dr. What is it? Kaveh Farouk. And this is one that I did read. And again, it's it's almost an Osprey-style book in the level of illustrations. And so that's very cool. There's lots of maps. It gives you a good sense of history of Persia throughout, the period from the Achaemenids all the way to the Parthians, the Sassanids, or the Sasanians. I'm not sure which is the correct one. The Sasanians is what he uses, and beyond. So it's very wide, very broad, lots of cool reference points. The thing that bugged me about it is that he's a real Persian booster, in the sense that he never misses an opportunity to suggest that the Persians maybe invented something that Westerners didn't invent. And so maybe he's right, but I really got the impression in some of his examples that he was straining a bit. Now, I'm perfectly happy to concede that, the concept of the Western Knight may ultimately owe a great deal to the heavily armed Persian cataphract, right? Essentially, but to call that Persian, is that accurate? Is that entirely accurate when we've got Sarmatians? I know these are our Iranian peoples, but when you've got steppe people who are doing that as well, with the heavy armor, with the long lances, the charging, the melee, is it all strictly Persian? I'm not so sure. There were some other things that he referenced. I can't remember the details, but there were a few moments where I was thinking, okay, Farouk, I get the point. All right, this other one, there's not. I don't have a ton of Persian stuff, so it was good to have that, because now we're getting into Greeks. This is just a very basic. I've never read this. This is a $5 purchase at a bookstore. This is probably like what a college textbook used to be, right? In the 90s and early 2000s. A handbook of life in ancient Greece. It looks great. It's the kind of book you could you just kind of flip to a section, just kind of flip through and get a lot of kind of basic knowledge from 25 years ago about ancient Greece. So one thing though that I have come to notice and not care about is that older history books are just more fun to read. For a while I was thinking, well, okay, this was published in the 1980s, right? Or this was published 10 years ago. Can we really trust it? I don't think that way anymore, because I think there was something of a peak in historical writing in the 1990s. And I'm going to say that, I'm going to say the 90s were peak in lots of ways, possibly simply because of my age. But it seems to be true, right? So anyway, I don't feel too bad about having outdated books. I feel a little bad about having this book, though. This is Sailing the Wine Dark Sea, Why the Greeks Matter. This is by Thomas Cahill. Now, Thomas Cahill is a guy who wrote How the Irish Saved Civilization. He wrote a bunch of other books. He's got a sort of general medieval history book that we'll get to at some point. He's a generalist, he's a popularizer, and I bought several of his books kind of before I learned to not like that sort of thing, I guess. And so it's not that this is bad. I don't want to make you feel bad if you like it. It's a good general introduction, and if I had, maybe if I'd picked it up at a different point in my life, it would have really resonated with me. I do like the fact that his books tend to be a little interesting in terms of their structure. So he does lots of this type of thing where there are sidebars and little breakout texts. He's got maps and things. He's got poetry is all I'm trying to say. It's, he's got typically plates of illustrations and things. Okay. Some of those are kind of questionable. All right, we'll move on. But this one, I never read it, and I don't know that I ever will, honestly, because it's just too general. It's not saying anything that I kind of like. I feel a little condescended to be told that I need to read a book about why the Greeks matter, I guess. I like, you don't need to convince me. All right, this one was good. The Greco-Persian Wars. This was published, I checked recently, I think in 1970. So it's, it's an older history, but it was fun to read. I read it probably 20 years ago, and it was fun to read all the way through. It gets into the battles and the naval battles as well as the land ones, and so it gives you some good backdrop without feeling like you're being spoon-fed because you're a millennial or something, right? Okay, this one was also fun. Now, Tom Holland is, I would almost put him in the same category as Cahill, but I just enjoy his writing more. So, Persian Fire, the First World Empire and the Battle for the West. Very, very capitalizing on the East versus West distinction there. This came out, I want to say, after the movie 300, right? I don't know that it references the movie 300. When was this published? 2005. So, yeah, that's right around the time, right? That 300 came out. And so that's probably why I bought it, right? To sort of get a little more history. And it was good. What I found interesting about it was, although it does present the wars very much as an East versus West thing. It builds up the distinction between, the Persian culture and society and the Greek norms. I think his thing, if I remember in that book, is that he's getting into how the Greeks were developing this kind of, market culture, capitalism, whatever, that was very different from the monarchy, of course, of Persia. But he doesn't make them into cartoon characters, either the Greeks or the Persians. So there was a lot that is really admirable and interesting about the Persians, and the Greeks. So I found that to be a fun read. Herodotus is one of those that, just look at this thing. I don't know that I'll ever sit down and read it all the way through, especially now that I also have this, which is the landmark Herodotus. So this is the one that you really want. And the reason why is, if you just flip through anywhere here, just look at this beautiful thing. It's almost taken to too much of an extreme, the level of annotations in these landmark editions. But they are beautiful for that. I love it. That said, I have not read this all the way through. It is incredibly daunting. But, the fact that you could... Let's say you were interested in what Herodotus had to say about the Scythians, right? You could go to those books and you could easily find cross-references to other things, little footnotes about what he may have meant or his sources or other references. So a fantastic resource. Just not a book you want to read in bed because it's huge. So maybe that's where the Penguin version could come in, but I don't know if I'll ever get around to reading that one. Another landmark edition is Thucydides, and this one, I don't know why I would have picked it up. Herodotus seems more of an interesting writer to me than Thucydides. Thucydides, of course, is writing a more narrow, on a more narrow topic. This is the Peloponnesian War, and I'm not a big Peloponnesian War guy. Maybe I got this after Rome 2 came out with one of its DLCs, the Sparta DLC, right, which was all about basically the Peloponnesian War. So I could see myself doing that. Very many of my history books are simply purchases that serve as adjuncts to my gaming, like my historical gaming interests. So that's what it is. But again, another beautiful book. Oh my gosh, no, this was $6. $6 I got this for. See, this is why I like to keep the price tags on my used purchases, because I'm going to tell my kids in about 20 years what I just told you. I got this for $6 at the old bookstore. So that's why I got this. Fantastic. Okay. Haven't read it, but at some point maybe. I started this one. This is the Grand Strategy of Classical Sparta, the Persian Challenge by Paul A. Rahi, or Rahi. I've started it, and I gave up about 126 pages in, according to this bookmark. It's sort of an interesting book, but it's rather grim. Sometimes you wonder if the people in ancient history were as bad as the rumors say, and yeah, it seems they were. So there's some unfortunate things about this, but I think what got me was the grand strategy element. I've got another book which we'll get to in another video called The Grand Strategy of the Byzantine Empire, and that one was a lot of fun. But again, my interest in ancient Greece is not as high, sadly, I guess, as my interest in other periods. So I can see why I maybe gave that up. One, though, that I did read all the way through, which is kind of surprising to me considering its length, is this one, Song of Wrath, The Peloponnesian War Begins, by J.E. Linden. This one, I remember reading a review about it, and the reviewer said, Linden has a hobby horse, and he rides it pretty hard. And I think what she meant by that was that he has like sort of a theory, a hypothesis about why the Peloponnesian War started, and he talks about that extensively. He brings it up, and tries to prove it a lot. That didn't bother me when I was reading. It didn't stand out particularly, but maybe it will if you're more familiar with the period than I am. I just found it very enjoyable, very accessible, and somehow I was able to read it when my kids were about 2 or 3 years old, and they were all, I have triplets, by the way, so they were all, stumbling around, trying to walk badly, crawling into things, and somehow I maintained, I called on my dad powers to ignore them furiously and managed to finish this book during that time. One of my greatest achievements. Okay. Then we've got, so this is Alexander of Macedon by Harold Lamb. A nice addition too. Harold Lamb is one of those old authors who, look at that nice little map here, who he's not writing historical fiction, but he is narrativizing history for people who are just getting interested in it. So it's fun reading. But he also wrote like 1 million years ago. So this is published, so copyright MCMXLVI. So 1946, is that right? L is 50, isn't it? 1946 this was written. So just a year after the end of World War II, Alexander of Macedon comes out by Harold Lamb. I've got a couple of other books by him, we'll see. 2 on the Crusades, which are similarly very fun to read and give you a narrative of the history where he has, described the characters and he clearly sets up the goals. Now, of course, because of its age, you understand that these kinds of books by Harold Lamb are a product of their time. And because of the genre, this is not like a strict scholarly academic history. You understand to take it with a grain of salt, right? I see no problem with that. It's a fun read. That's what I'm looking for in a lot of my history books. But one that is a little more scholarly is this one, The Generalship of Alexander the Great by Major General J.F.C. Fuller. Is that right? I'm reading it backwards. But here's the dude himself, which, my gosh, look at that guy. Life goals at some point to be that guy, but he probably, he probably lived a more adventurous life than I ever will, God willing. So, but this one is, I don't know if I finished this one. I read one book on Alexander, but I can't remember if it was the Harold Lamb book or if it was the Major General Dude book. But regardless, it's been a long time since I looked at either of these. But this one is the one, you could imagine this being maybe taught, 70 years ago at West Point or something, as like a required reading. One, though, that I did read relatively recently is Michael Grant from Alexandria, Alexander to Cleopatra. Alexander to Cleopatra. Michael Grant has written like 30 books on, history. And I don't know who this guy is. I don't know, because look at this. Right, look at all these books by Michael Grant. I don't know if I should take this as a warning sign. I kind of feel like I should. Because these are, they're very fun reads, I will say. He does a great job of presenting the topics relatively quickly, giving you a sense of things, um, giving you some wit. You know, he's a good writer in that sense. It's not riveting reading, but it is a breezy yet scholarly tone that is very accessible and fun. It's a little arch, right? In the sense that you can sense that he's kind of maybe arching his eyebrow at things, looking down at things. Um, but you kind of get into it. This is probably 2030, no, 1982. Okay, more like 45 plus years old at this point. But that was a good one. I probably picked that up a long time ago because I was playing a Seleucids campaign or something, right? But there wasn't a lot about the Seleucids in those books. There's not a lot of military history there, but they're still interesting despite that. This one is one I have not read, have not cracked yet, but Alexandria, City of the Modern Mind, or the Western Mind, rather, by Theodore Vretos. So, you know, if you are a kid who likes books, then you probably had very strong feelings about the Library of Alexandria and what happened to it, right? The horrible, tragic burning of the Library of Alexandria. Now, there was a video by Pre-Modernist, which is a fantastic channel, by the way, Pre-Modernist. He had a video on the Library of Alexandria and the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and I think in that video he was making the case, if I remember correctly, that it maybe wasn't as big of a deal as all of us nerds, you know, have made it out to be. But the fact that he was able to do it in such a way that I didn't, approach him with like high dudgeon is a testament to his style. So Pre-Modernist, definitely worth a read, worth a look. But yeah, Alexandria, City of the Western Mind, probably worth a read. This one I did read. This is, and I recommend. What is this? Dwayne W. Roller, Empire of the Black Sea. The Rise and Fall of the Mithridatic World. So, as he says in this book, and it's a relatively short one, many history books about the Kingdom of Pontus, right, are really books about Mithridates or Mithridates the Sixth. I believe that's the one. Mithridates the Great, anyway. The last one. And this is because he was the one who was mostly up in Rome's face. And so a lot of our sources are Roman, and so that's why we get a lot about the end of the Kingdom of Pontus. This book intends very consciously to get the earlier stuff in there and spend more time on it. Now, it's not a very long book, and there is still a lot about Mithridates the Great here, but he really tries to put it into a broader historical context, and I do appreciate that. And I just love the story, too. I mean, Mithridates the Great, not the most admirable character, arguably, but there is something that is very, you have to admire, what he was doing in the sense of going up against Rome and trying to pull together this coalition that did ultimately encircle the Black Sea to resist and to sort of build up his own power base. He was planning to invade Italy at one point, right? And he could have, I think. So anyway, it's a fascinating story. Definitely recommend this. It's not really a super flashy, popular history that's trying to get your attention like so many of them are. But it's very, very, very interesting. A tragically bad book, Chariot. Arthur Cottrell, Chariot. So everything is bad about this. The art chosen is bad. The art is bad. I mean, the stone, okay, fine. But like, what is that? An Art Deco version of some, ancient... Anyway, the art's bad. The title's bad. The title is Chariot. From Chariot to Tank, the astounding rise and fall of the world's first war machine. So it's just that it's all over the place, and the book is all over the place, and this is why the writing is poor. He covers a lot of ground, so to his credit, he does not only discuss like Mycenaean chariots or Egyptian chariots or Hittite chariots. He goes into the East for a little bit, right? Like he goes into India, he goes into China, and he talks about the different use of chariots in those places. And there are some good nuggets of information. But I just found this so obnoxious that he would jump from place to place, and that he would just kind of say very little over long paragraphs, and it just felt like a bit of a mess. And there wasn't enough of value to make the jumping around worth it. I think sometimes people critique books because they jump around, like I just did. But there are ways to do it well, and if you are providing value for the cost of forcing your reader to shift their attention back to, to pay the mental tax of having to focus on India and now China and now back to Greece, there are ways to do that and still provide a value for the reader, I guess. But he did not do that, and it's very sad because there are so few books written about chariots, and I'd like to read them. Again, this is one that I would like to read. I like chariots. I also like elephants very much. So Elephants and Kings, An Environmental History. Thomas R. Troutman. This was recommended on a blog, I think. I think it's a blog of unmitigated pedantry, which is a blog that is very military history oriented, and had a series of blog posts that talked about like the siege of Minas Tirith in the movies versus the books. Because in the movies, the Minas Tirith siege is very badly portrayed, right? Like from an accuracy standpoint. In the books, you know that there are trenches. You know that beyond the city it's not just a flat grassland like a soccer field or something. It is townlands, right? There are farms and orchards and little walls and little buildings all over the place. But none of that made it into the movie. They went, understandably perhaps, with a very simple vision of the siege. So in that blog, he talks about things as well as war elephants. That's one of his topics. I think maybe they came up in reference to the Mumikill. But regardless, he talks about war elephants, and he recommended this book. And so I bought it, and someday I will read it. That book, one thing to say about it, because I did flip through it a bit, it is very much an Indian-focused book. Which makes sense, I imagine, because of all the places that used war elephants in history, probably India is the place where you could expect there to be surviving records from those historical periods. Because India was using, Southeast Asia was using war elephants up into modern times. Whereas, like the Carthaginians are just gone, so we don't have a lot of records about what they did. And, even the Hellenistic kingdoms, we don't have great records about what they did. So that book really focuses on India. It does have sections on Carthage, on the Seleucids, on other uses of war elephants, further west. But most of it is Southeast Asia, which is fine, in India and Southeast Asia. Okay, I did read this one. This is the first of many Osprey books we will see. War Elephants, fantastic book. Again, you like it for the pictures. Look at this beautiful art. This is where you get depictions of war elephants pulling down crenellations from castle walls. This is where you get pictures of dudes with guns on armored war elephants. That is awesome. So, I read this, but you almost don't need to because the pictures are so great. So that's a really fun one. But it also gives you, a good sense, just an overview like all the Osprey books of basics about the topic. The last book we're going to look at here is, to stick with the elephant theme, The Land of the Elephant Kings. Subtitle is Space, Territory, and Ideology in the Seleucid Empire. Fantastic book. Decent length, gets into good detail about this. And it's the title got me, right? I'm a war elephant fan, so of course I'm going to get this, based on the title. But it's also a rare case where a title is not just bait, right? Sometimes you get these very evocative book titles where the book itself is just dry and boring. And the title was clearly suggested by someone with more imagination than the writer. Not in this case. This guy has a good sense for drama. He has a good sense for just interesting moments, but he's also a scholar. and he's not trying to sell you on how cool any of this is, right? He's not going to try to popularize it too much. He is talking about some, pretty, I take it, heavy academic stuff. Not my field, but I felt like I was able to follow it pretty well, about how the Seleucids saw their empire, or the Seleucids, I guess. I don't know how to say it. How did they see their empire? How did they see their relationship to the people that were there, the boundaries of the land itself? And it opens with a fantastic scene, actually, of war against one of these war elephants. Let's start this. Yeah, so this is like the second paragraph. The dynastic chronicle of the Hasmonean kings of Judah, known to us in its Greek translation as First Maccabees, celebrates the Jewish struggle for independence from the Seleucid Empire. The Battle of Beth Zechariah in 162 BC pitted the exhausted and outnumbered Jewish fighters against the massed ranks of the professional Seleucid army under the command of Lysias, guardian of the child king Antiochus V. The chronicle exaggerates an imperial army of 100,000 infantrymen, 20,000 cavalry, and most terrifying of all, 32 war elephants. To each beast were assigned 1,000 infantry and 500 picked cavalry. Strong wooden howdahs, strapped to the elephants' backs, held 4 men, and Indian mahouts steered from the necks. Against such odds, the Jewish resistance stood no chance, and Beth Zechariah was a total Seleucid victory. But the rebels had their glory. For our chronicler records that Eleazar Everan, brother of Judas Maccabeus, seeing one elephant towering over the others in royal armor and mistakenly identifying its mahout as the Seleucid king Antiochus V himself, carved his way through the phalanx, got beneath the beast, buried his spear in its exposed belly, and killed the elephant, which crushed the Samson-like hero in its fall. Beautiful stuff. What does that remind you of other than the fifth battle, right, in the Silmarillion with, was it the dwarven king of Belagost or Nogrod, who got under Encalagon the Black, was crushed to death by him, but drove his knife into his belly so that the worm had to flee the field. Was it Encalagon? It was one of the dragons. Anyway, just a wonderful scene from Maccabees there. Now, this is not a military history, per se. This is a political, social, I guess, history of the political and social structures of the Seleucid Empire. But it was really interesting reading. I felt like I was, learning something and not just being spoon-fed something just to popularize it. I've been ragging on popularizing a lot, so it's probably time for me to stop the video here. When we do another one of these, we're going to go down to the second shelf, and we're going to get into Roman history. Roman, Carthaginian, some other Persian stuff, Huns. It's going to be a good time. Hope you join me for that. Till the next one, everybody, take care.